Om Adihi Sasam Yoga Namitta Hetu. Om Adihi Sam Yoga Namitta Hetu. Parastrikala Dakala Pidrista. Tam Vishvarupam Bhavabhuta Midyam. Devam Shatitastam Upasya Purvam. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Meditate upon the Lord as thine own self, seated in your heart, who appears to you as the universe and is the ultimate source of all living beings. Perceive that one as the primordial cause of the relationship between matter and consciousness, and as the partless divine entity who transcends the three phases of time. Om peace, peace, peace. May that Brahman protect us, may that Brahman sustain us, and may that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to our seminar on the divine incarnation called avatar, an interesting word which is being used in various ways in the world today. Of course, when we look at it as Vedantists and take up the word avatar, we know that it consists of Sanskrit, and that general meaning to it is that one who descends. Of course, if we use the word descends, we think of coming down out of the heavens, which is not the Vedantic idea, that there's no, as Vivekananda said, no big tyrant up on a throne in the sky somewhere looking down on everyone. So we would have to say comes out from within, like that chant I just chanted to begin this 2-day seminar. Descend then would mean coming from these inner realms. Call them the kingdoms of heaven within, if you like, or call them lokas or akashas. That would probably be the best word to use in terms of Krishna and Ramakrishna is the word akasha. Sri Ramakrishna himself favored that word and talked about when the soul reaches these inner planes, which you could also call chakras, or in English, lotuses, that when that experience was had of these inner realms, called by any of these various names I've just given, and then one would start to feel absolute knowledge of space at all of its levels. Not just at the physical level, which people are aware of today in this, what they call the Burloka, or the physical world, but a space of energy, and not just the energy of kinetic energy or electric energy that again exists inside of physical space, but the life force or primordial energy, which Krishna and Ramakrishna all taught about. Now, when we start into a subject like that, we're hooking up 3 yugas, Treta Yuga, the Dvapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. And there's a yuga that is a 4th yuga that starts them all off, starts this whole game of dice rolling, because the whole idea of the 4 yugas came from the names of the different kinds of rolls of the dice that were there in the earliest time. And so when you take on a body and a body-mind mechanism, as we say in Vedanta, then there's a certain amount of risk in it, as we know, and chance. And if we come to the earth, which is very rare, by the way, in full consciousness of ourself, which means our knowledge, absolute certitude that the individualized soul that appears before us is one with the Supreme Soul. The Jivatman is one with the Paramatman, as we would say in Sanskrit. Then a lot of that risk of embodiment gets taken away. So we see that exemplified in the avatars, from Ram in the Treta Yuga, to Krishna in the Dvapara Yuga, to Sri Ramakrishna in the Kali Yuga. So in the Satya Yuga, there were avatars, and I thought maybe I would look into, in the next class, look for that section in the Adhyatma Ramayana, which tells us about the 10 avatars. And the 3 we're looking at here are pretty much the main avatars of each yuga, but there were some other avatars that came along earlier when the earth was just a body of water, for instance. And so the Lord had to become a tortoise and swim in the waters and do away with the demons there. So all of this goes back into Itihasa, ancient scriptural history, it's called in India, and has become the stuff of myths and legends. But when it comes to later periods of time, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali Yuga, and particularly the Kali Yuga, because that's right in our face, as we say, every day, we're having to face off with the vicissitudes of there's constant changes and the twists and turns of Maya, which manifests itself so readily and easily, in fact, so almost naturally that people can't detect it. Manifests itself through name, nama, form, rupa, and desha, time. Desha, space, and then kala, time, and then nimitta, cause and effect. So name, form, time, space, and cause and effect comprise this word Maya. That was the definition given to us by Swami Vivekananda when he arrived here on the scene in this Kali Yuga at the behest of his Kali Yuga avatar, his great master Sri Ramakrishna, and brought these teachings to the West in 1893, just in time for the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. So this is a matter of immediacy. Rather, when you look at Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, you're thinking about having unearthed the battlefield of Kurukshetra recently, they think, and starting to carbon date some of the articles there, that this goes back thousands of years before Jesus. So you're looking into an age that, even judged by historical time, the way we view it today in the Burloka, or on the earth, goes way back. And in the Gita, Krishna is talking about of seers I am Kapila. So Lord Kapila would go back even further than Sri Krishna. And that would take us back more thousands of years. So basically you begin to get this idea of the Kala part of Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. The time portion is that it begins to extend itself so far back within. The avatar, when we say again, descends, comes out from inside, doesn't come down from up. So descends is, of course, a word that's not going to be entirely adequate. So the avatar would come out from within, and also from this much more extended ideation of time than we have here, which is very chronological, very distorted. What's the word they use? Linear. See, so if you can get beyond linear time, that is the ideation or the concept of linear time, and you begin to look at things eternally in the eye of eternity, then even time begins to take on this very a vast extended view, and you begin to try and apportion it by placing these partitions over it. And these were called the 4 yugas, and 4 yugas equals 1 Maha Yuga, and that is many hundreds and thousands of years long. With a basic description of time, then we can look at how the avatar sort of rides it as his steed or as his mount, and from age to age descends, as Krishna says in the Gita. He says, Yuge cha dharmasha. So he wants to know that everyone to know that when he descends, when he comes out from within, he does so to establish and maintain the dharma, righteousness on this earth, even so far as on this earth, which is a very no mean feat, as they say, as we know from the condition of the world today. And so many incarnations of those avatars are also coming, like Krishna in terms of Vedavyas. Vedavyas is supposed to take a number of births in order to maintain the Vedanta, the teachings of the Vedanta. So in the Gita, we also hear Sri Krishna talking about, of saints I have Kapila, and I am the father of Vedanta. Well, that's Vedavyas, and he has come many times as Vedavyas in order to keep these teachings available for us. So I say it's a great feat. And when we come down to the immediacy of today's time, when Sri Ramakrishna, when we can look at almost face to face, as Mahatma Gandhi said about him, when we look on Sri Ramakrishna, we see God face to face. So when we look upon someone who is so near and dear to us and so immediate, and have that moniker placed upon him called the Kali Yuga avatar, then we see it becomes more real than just these avatars that are almost, as it were, enwrapped in these earlier yugas and very distant from us. If we didn't have scriptures like the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita, then we wouldn't know that much about them. But ironically enough, it's maybe for the devotees, they really want to know the personality of the Lord. But as far as the Jnanis are concerned, and probably as far as the rest of the world is concerned, just to know about the truth that they teach is more to the point. Probably even for the devotees, because how often does the avatar come? When we talk about yugas, well, if we talk about it, say, in the tradition we were born and raised in, most of us, which is Christianity, whether we were participating in it or not, and even in Judaism, whether we were participating in it or not, or whether it was just a matter of convention that we were raised amidst it. When we look at it in that term, we see that it's been 2,000 years since we've seen a prophet or a great incarnation, according to that tradition, Christianity, and Moses even further before that. So this all gets swallowed up in time as well. So this is a kind of a little introduction to warm us up to the topic, to show you the teachings that I've been selecting that we will look at, because the subtitle of this is to me is the Advaitic accent of the avatars. I looked back and pulled out certain teachings from Ramayana, Adhyatma Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, of course, in this day and age. Our own founder, Lexikson, whose spiritual name in Sanskrit was Purushottama. There's a chapter in the Gita called Purushottama Yoga. He also had a great eye towards looking at these different prophets and in various religions. So he was also very interested in the particular manifestation of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. We'll probably be looking at him more tomorrow. I plan to take the teachings of Sri Ram first. You heard the beautiful bhajans to him as we opened up in the arati this morning to set our hearts right. And the chant I started off with instructed us to meditate upon the Lord as thine own self, seated in your heart. And that's a beautiful sloka because it pulls together bhakti and jnana. We'll have some two wings of the bird teachings from Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa tomorrow that state the import of integrating these yogas. And in fact, our recent retreat in IC Portland, Oregon, some weeks ago, was on that subject of integrated yoga or Purna yoga. And that word becomes, across the board, a word that isn't even necessarily restricted to Hinduism or even to Sanskrit, but is nowadays seen as just the path that you walk, no matter what religion you're on. You're doing some kind of yoga, you're practicing some kind of spiritual discipline. And in that way, you're connecting yourself up with the avatars. You're, as it were, in devotional terms, resting at the feet of the Lord and the Divine Mother of the universe. So if we look back into time, Satya Yuga first, almost timeless place, where beings, living beings, are said to have been aware of 100% of their spirituality. That's a long time back, along this trajectory of time, back inwards to a timeless place. Then after Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga comes, throw up the dice, the next throw the dice, and then all of a sudden you have this Treta Yuga, which is governed, looked over, presided over, protected by Sri Ramchandra, basically, and a couple of avatars that were in that yuga that were manifestations of him. But when it came to Sri Ramchandra himself with Sita by his side, then we had this divine couple appearing again in time. And at that point, they say that about 1/3 of people's consciousness of spirituality, of Dharma, disappeared. So Satya Yuga, it was all there. Everyone, if we put it Vedantically, everyone knew the self is all in all, none else exists, and I am that, thou art that. Everyone knew that for a fact. And so they moved about the earth plane and other planes in meditation, in full awareness of the Atman, of the Supreme Soul, and its connection with Brahman, its identity with Brahman even. But Treta Yuga comes along, and all of a sudden 1/3 of that knowledge slips away from people's minds. And so you have the teachings of Sri Ramchandra coming forward. You could probably say then that Satya Yuga, why write it down, you see, because everyone knew it already. So it's kind of an exercise in futility, you see. So if you're walking around with it, then as Sri Ramakrishna said, what's the use of a tank when there's a flood all around? What's the use of a tank when the monsoon season is on you? In other words, you go to the tank to swim and to draw water and so forth. But if there's a monsoon season going, the tank overflows and there's water everywhere. You can take a canoe straight across the land to the bay of Bengal. You don't have to twist and turn through many roads to get there. So what he's talking about is that this overflow of truth is there in everything, in everyone. And it's seen and acknowledged by everyone. And where is the Ravana, you see? Where are the Asuras? Where are the demonic forces of Maya at that time when everything is just Satyam and it's all known by everyone? So then you see the time starts to unfold, and Treta Yuga comes along. 1/3 of people's wisdom goes away about it. Forgetfulness, Vishmriti, it's called. Don't have your divine memory. Part of your divine memory gets lost. See, and so Avatar Ramchandra comes on the scene. There's a great force of evil beginning to infringe upon collective consciousness in the Treta Yuga. That's got an overall name called Ravana. And so we see that whole epic of Sita and Rama, Ravana and Lakshmana, Hanuman playing a part, forming and rolling out of time and manifesting itself right down here on the physical earth. And then you've got the need to write things down. So at that point, and it also figures in nicely with the fact that the rishis of India felt like they didn't want to write anything down. They wanted all done by memory. So now you know why. If you look at this long, different concept of time that isn't so linear, that's more immediate and timeless time, if you could say it, then you'd see that it's very necessary to begin writing things down. But when the rishis were teaching their children and their disciples in the early days, it was all by memory. So like what we call swadhyaya practice now. It didn't even need to be a practice then because it was present in the mind of the rishis. And there were many rishis in those yugas. Too many to shake a stick at, and very difficult to find those nowadays. Or when you see somebody like Sri Ramakrishna comes, then undoubtedly, then you've got not just a rishi, but a great manifestation of God coming amongst us. So back to Ramchandra, then you have these great epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana are in the making by such great beings as Vedas. They're beginning to compose these things so that this truth gets established quick before the Dwapara Yuga sets in, where people will lose 2/3 of their consciousness about Dharma, and they're not acting like themselves anymore. The negative forces are on the increase and the positive forces are in the decline. So from age to age, I embody myself forth to destroy the old Dharma and resurrect the new Dharma. And so that's Sri Krishna's age, you see, when all of a sudden you can find him on the battlefield with Arjuna, giving out the great discourses on 18 different forms of yoga, including the yoga of how to get rid of depression. And so you see that these avatars are all aligned and ready for the task of coming out from these bliss-filled, pure regions, akashas, lokas, chakras. These are all within you, not within the body, but within the great mind. And the prana is flowing from the great mind outward. And then pretty soon it's out here, causing you to move your hands, causing you to see objects, taste things, taste food, and so forth. But if you take that prana back in and follow it, the great Garuda bird of prana, get on his back, fly back inside to these beautiful lokas and kashas within you, kingdoms of heaven within you, then all of a sudden you're connecting immediately, almost instantaneously with these great souls. And they're still there, watching over you, the Lord and Mother of the universe, the great souls that take on this task of keeping the Dharma present in people's minds. And then all of a sudden you have loss of that last third of people's remembrance of Dharma and spirituality. And it's called the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. And so Divine Mother sends her most intense manifestation of light, because where the darkness is the thickest, you need the greatest light to penetrate. So out of this great nada, Sri Ramakrishna used to call it, when you arrive at the Vishuddha chakra. So he's talking about the throat, right? So he says, when consciousness arises at the Vishuddha chakra, then you can hear the nada, that's Om, and you can see over the horizon of that great sound, which is producing all things through vibration. And then you see everything's made of space. That's one of his statements we'll look at tomorrow. So he says the penultimate thing then, which would be called Vaivaya by Lord Kapila in the Samkhya Yoga, is to see everything as space. He called it the great Akasha. And then you know that all these 5 dolls that fit inside of each other, as we like to say, are these different phases of time in space, and they all act according to the cosmic laws. There are 12 of them, as you know, according to the Shaivites, and then the 24 cosmic principles that fall below them. So you take these beautiful systems that you've been learning about, that even Lord Buddha said, become a master of all of them. And of course, Swami Vivekananda, you start thinking about the import of what he's doing when he's telling you to bring the 4 yogas together. When you bring the 4 yogas together, it's an easy thing compared to having to do everything that the Avatar did for all different kinds of people in the different religious traditions of the world, in order to keep negativity at bay and keep Dharma and truth on the rise and constant in people's minds. That's a great task. So today, you can see what I'm saying here is that in terms of the phases of time, which I just chatted about, Paras Trikala to Kalopidrstaha, it transcends the 3 phases of time, past, present, and future. So you can simplify the whole sweep of time by just calling it in 3 ways, past, present, future. And you can simplify all of space, the Mahakasha, by calling it these 5 different kinds of akashas. So by the time that you sit down to do your swadhyaya and try and refresh your memory, just like you would push a refresh button on the computer and say, oh, everything starts again, you see. And all of a sudden, I've got to bring all of this rolling back into my mind and call it my own wisdom. And we'll call that self-knowledge in this day and age. And that will vault us or transport us into knowledge of the truth and the bliss and the peace and the love and the light which accompanies it. For instance, 24 cosmic principles, but here you know what troubles you. See, Maya troubles you. And so if Maya is name, form, time, space, and causation, karma, and you have a nice 5-fold description of that given to you by the Avatar's messenger, in this case, Narendranath, the Lord of Men, Swami Vivekananda, then you can pretty easily cut to the chase with that and bring yourself current to this truth that is ever-present, all-pervasive, and unborn, undying, unchanging, indivisible, all-pervasive. That's what we're going to look at first. All of those things I just said are a description of the Advaitic fortress, the Tower of Truth that India has built over time via the sacrifice of the avatars. I take 100% refuge in the avatar. Let's see, who is the supreme physician for all maladies. Swami Vivekananda wrote in one of his songs called Achandala. So even these great souls that come, they're always thinking about the eternal form, the formless form of the avatar that exists even after bodies come and go, and are the witness, are the best witness for all the phenomenon that's happening in the universe. So I think that maybe will warm us up to the subject of avatar and phases of time in space. As far as names and forms go, pretty much as well, because we know that consciousness can take on forms, and that when it does, we tend to give it names like Ramchandra or Sri Krishna or Sri Ramakrishna. And when we say those names, they're full of, pregnant with power, and also help transport the mind beyond names and forms. It's like looking at the biggest wave in the ocean, as Vivekananda said, and watching it as it rises, suck up all other waves into it. One of the great benefits of doing your meditation upon Ishvara, selecting an Ishtam, meditating every day of your life upon it, and then having that advantage of connecting yourself to all of time, all of space, and seeing it as it appears, seeing it the way the avatar would see it. So I took the painting that I had a friend of mine do, Gary Dickens on the Big Island here, this back in the 80s. Can you paint me an image of Sri Rama and Sri Krishna, because he was a Vaishnava, but put Sri Ramakrishna in the middle. So we used that on one of the early Jaima music CDs called Guru Bhajans. And that I used again as a backdrop for this chart. So let's start into the seminar now formally, that I've given this introduction and gotten us used to this, because we're going to spend some 48 hours now together in the avatar, at the feet of the avatar, exploring his great mind and selecting certain accents of non-duality, because what holds the avatars together over such a long sweep of time, never to be forgotten, and to be remembered long before the most recent, like Jesus and Buddha. Buddha was 550 years before Jesus. So thousands of years before that, we're keeping track of these great souls who were all holding the banner of Dharma, and doing it with great fealty, and putting it forth in various scriptures based upon this non-dual truth. So the accents of the avatars, if we look at them from age to age, is what I'm trying to get at. I took some search in a few slokas from Ramayana, Gita, and Gospel. And so we can show from earliest time up to this yuga, that is through the yugas. And there are many yugas, Mahayugas, that roll along too, with a little pralaya in between each. It's just like your breath. You satisfy yourself by breathing in, and then you hold, and then you breathe out, and then you hold again. That kind of threefold or sometimes fourfold breath they talk about is just an exact metaphor for what's going on in time. It's also breathing. The worlds are also breathing. And the mind is also breathing. So when the mind breathes, then it breathes in and holds. You see there's a little pause there. And then it breathes out, everything gets expended, and there's a little pause there. It's called kumbhaka. So when the breath freezes in delight, as our founder, Lex Hixon, wrote about it in one of the Ram Prasad songs, then your mind gets transported in ecstasy. So there has to be this kumbhaka that comes to the soul every once in a while. And it comes to everyone who has deep sleep. That's the Mahanidra, it's called. That's the kumbhaka. You tuck everything back away into its source. Nature goes back into the seeds of unmanifested nature. You go back into the feet of the Lord, because you're a sentient being. So when all of this happens, there's a pralaya, a long period of rest. Nobody can measure that because all the individuals have been merged into the infinite. At that time, Divine Mother says, when pralaya, Mahapralaya comes, I myself dissolve back into Brahman. So this Brahman is what we're going to be looking at as the foundation, the substratum of all of consciousness that comes from this unmoving foundation and then takes on the appearancy of movement. So let's use that as a segue into this chart. So go ahead and show the first chart. We're going to, I'll show you that image that Gary Dickens painted for me, which is right in here, still hanging on my wall in the next room. And it's life size, it's very big. And so we see that it's a perfect backdrop for a 3-yuga seminar. If we want to look at Treta, Dvapara, and Kali Yuga, all coming out of Satya Yuga, which is, of course, the truth itself, where everyone is fully aware of these teachings. Now we're in ourselves, as it were, we're in the Kali Yuga. And historically speaking, in terms of the way they measure time, I probably should add in there that to the more enlightened beings, they can live in Satya Yuga all the time, no matter how the other yugas pass. As they pass by, they're still living. So this would give us the idea that in India, time is not seen as linear only, or absolutely, but it's seen more like a layer cake, a 4-layer cake. So basically these 4 layers, these 4 yugas are existing simultaneously in the eternal moment. That's an Advaitic teaching. So if you talk about time, you're talking about it as linear, you're talking about it as having phases, you're talking about it as having yugas and pralaya in between each one of them. And the mind gets exhausted, basically, trying to conceive of this. And it becomes a matter of a lot of study and meditation, only to reach a timeless moment, you see, which everyone is trying to do. That's what you did in deep sleep last night. You successfully affected that state of Mahanidra, the great sleep, and you willingly went into it and surrendered yourself there. And then you find yourself coming back out of it. So a 24-hour period of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which we can also look at later in the seminar, is again just like this breath. You breathe in and hold, and breathe out and hold. It's just like waking, dreaming, and deep sleep followed by waking again. Or if you want to put it that way, deep sleep, then it breaks into vibration, you dream. Then that vibration gets more solid, more gross, and you're awake, and objects that were vibrations in your mind that were seeds in your mind in deep sleep turned into thoughts of the seeds in dream state, then turned into actual objects in the waking state. And then you take it all back again, just like the breath. It's that simple. So if you are conscious of the movement of things, let's make sure we stay with the Advaita here, the apparent movement of things, then that's to be a witness of time in 3 phases and a witness of Akasha in 5 levels. Knowing Om, or the great word, in the beginning was the word, would be a great advantage to the person who's pursuing knowledge of Dharma, or Jnanam, or Satyam, Satya itself, truth, Satchidananda. So we often go to Om and use that as a sort of backdrop upon which we try and explain everything. That'll probably come up a little bit, but you can see here with this chart then that I've apportioned it in 3 ways and taken out some essential Advaitic teachings from Ramayana, Gita, and Gospel. that we can use to understand about the avatar's appearance. Because when anything makes an appearance in time and space, then it's already tainted. See, it's like words get tainted by the tongue, thoughts get tainted by the mind. That is, these pure words, these pure thoughts tend to get dumbed down. And that's what happened over the course of the yugas, right? When everyone lost 1/3 of their consciousness from Satya to Treta, lost another third, so that 2/3 are gone from Treta to Dvapara, and then lost all of it when the Kali Yuga kicked in and found themselves wandering around, not knowing where they came from, who they are, and what happened to them, how they got here. I mean, all of the preliminary or penultimate questions of life, if anyone even begins to think about them, because in the Kali Yuga, they're not, obviously, those come forward with this loss of memory. And you begin to ask these questions out of suffering. That's the rub, you see. If you were to ask these questions out of inquiry, it would be beautiful. You'd get your answers if you were persistent. But you begin to ask these questions: who am I? Where have I come from? Why am I suffering? Out of suffering itself, because those ages have already gone by, and you've already established your belief in time instead of transcended it. You've already visited so many different kinds of space instead of transcended them. Instead of seeing them as, well, either number one, unreal, if you want to go straight to the Advaita, or number two, that they came out of your mind. Now, if you had either one of those perspectives in you, you would stop suffering. Suffering would go away. Like even Sri Ramakrishna said about the cancer in his throat. Yes, I don't feel the pain. I only feel the pain when I have to talk to you right now, he told one person. Isn't that painful, Master? Only when I have to come down from Mother Kali's feet and talk to you, then it's painful, he said. So then Sri Ramakrishna said, as soon as you go away and I stop talking, my mind will go right back inward, deep to the Mahakasha, to the Chitakasha, he called it, beyond the Bhutakasha, beyond the Pranakasha, beyond the Chitakasha, beyond the Jnanakasha, into this ultimate, indivisible space of pure being, which we're moving towards here, this great tower of truth I want to talk to you about. So back to my point is that if you ask the question already in knowledge of, in faith of the truth, like truth is, God exists, I am. If you're coming from any of those positions, which are all really pretty much the same thing, then you're knocking on the door and it will be answered, as Jesus said. It will be opened unto you. But if you're coming at this again and again through lifetimes with, I'm suffering, I don't know what happened, everything's so confused, I'm not clear. And then pretty soon an evil comes over you, like Ravana gets in. And you have a great avatar like Ram having to come and deal with him. He put so many arrows into Ravana in the end that he looked like a pincushion, they said. Ravana's body laying on the ground full of arrows, and he was weeping. And so Lakshmana asked Ram, why is he weeping? Because he's thinking about his children, Ram said. So he's still attached to the earth, you see, he's still attached, even though it's time to give it all up. So he never knew that fathers, mothers, children, family are always changing places all the time, from lifetime to lifetime. And he believed that those changes were real. That's called parinama in Sanskrit. If you believe nature to be real, if you believe the changes before you to be real. And it's the one thing that the West is still stumbling on. The Western philosophers are still stumbling on. The Western philosophers and the scientists are both beginning to come around to this Advaitic view. this non-dual view, that consciousness, that there is such a thing as consciousness, and it's not an object, and it's not an energy, and it's not a thought. Because objects, energy, and thoughts are for materialists and metaphysicians and scientists, right? But they're all coming around to that. But as they come around to these realizations that would turn them into realized seers, my teacher, Swami Sheshananda, peace and blessings be upon him here on my altar. As Swami Sheshananda told us before, they would say that as these thoughts come upon them about Advaita, these insights dawn in them, that it's not Indian Advaita they're thinking about. So he specified Indian Advaita as being that non-duality, which is alone based in a parinama. No change, no transformation. It's all a lie in front of you. Every change is not actual. It's non-actual. So that's the rule of thumb to measure whether or not you're seeing Brahman. Because when you see Brahman, the worlds are gone. Prana has stopped flowing. The soul's resting like a hawk in its nest, as the Upanishad says. The breath has stopped. That's kumbhaka. That's eternal kumbhaka. And you begin to see people in it, like Buddha. He called it nirvana. And Patanjali, he called it asampragata samadhi. Vedavyas, nirvikalpa samadhi, and so forth. So when this happens, then everything comes to a complete standstill, and then you realize that's where I came from. That's who I am. I'm nothing that moves or talks or speaks or gets born or dies, evolves. I am that capital T, that is a word, tat in Sanskrit, tatvamasi, om tat sat. That's why that word is commented on. They can write volumes on that, on those three words, what om means, what tat means, what sat means. And they can connect it all back to the ultimate truth that's beyond time, beyond the three phases of time, because the avatar has gotten itself into time to help us get out of time, get out of the concept of time. So this first quote up here, then let's look at it to understand that great soul, because we're talking about Ram, Krishna, and Ramakrishna, right? Wrong. We're talking about one soul. As Advaita sees it, to know about the avatar is to discover that he does not come only once, nor come many times as separate individuals. He is ever one and comes many times, over many yugas. The proof of this is in his teachings over ages, which reconfirm certain eternal and irrefutable principles that are central to India's Vedanta. And of course, India's Advaita Vedanta is what we're accenting here. That's where that first pillar of non-duality comes through, that if there's a great fortress there that's impregnable, then that's the first thing you would think of would be that it's changeless. What's another word they use in English? Immutable. Another word, infinite, but that gets into a little bit different pillar of this great truth. So let's launch right into this chart by taking up the first of Sri Ramachandra's great sayings in the Adhyatma Ramayana. He says, so he's talking about himself. So this is why you can take it on good authority. You got it from the horse's mouth, or in this case, from the cow's mouth in India, that basically he's talking about himself. He knows himself as that thou art, tatvamasi. So when he says something about it, then you know that he's not talking about it, because he read it in some book or his teacher told him about it anymore. You see, But he knows himself completely. So when he talks about it, he's talking about himself. So it carries that great weight of profundity and direct spiritual realization. So he says, the essence in all beings, the form of pure consciousness, who holds Maya and gunas in abeyance and looses them for sportive existence, for sportive expression. The fourth state beyond the three, who does without doing, hears without hearing, sees without seeing, is beyond comprehension by ignorant beings. It is the self of the universe. Salutations. So he had to take a long breath, as it were, to say all of that. But at the end, he ends with the great salutation to himself, basically. You are the darling of your own self, Tantra says. You witness your own being and you see that that's in everything, and basically that's all it is, as Vivekananda says in his Song of the Sannyasin. So if you're talking about this great statement coming out of the Adhyatma Ramayana, you can see how it can be taken apart and looked at. What first comes to apparent is that this being does action without doing. So that's sense of agency has disappeared in it, and any sense of reward for or recompense from any kind of act. That's a common feature that Rama and Krishna both talk about, and Sri Ramakrishna a little bit. By the time Sri Ramakrishna came along in the Kali Yuga, it was very difficult to talk people out of sense of agency. Well, in Ramchandra's Yuga, you could still, because they had a few thirds of their common sense, spiritually speaking, together, you could convince them that you don't do your acts and you shouldn't have desire for the fruits of your acts. You see that, you hear that in the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita. They're still trying to remind people of that. By the time the Kali Yuga comes along, you can't approach them that way. I mean, I've had swamis tell me they've talked to Western businessmen when they came over from India. There's no way that they're going to convince them that they should be doing their work without desire for the fruits. I heard this from several swamis. It just does not make sense to them. So that sense is gone now. You have to understand that about people. They don't have that fire of yoga in them anymore. They don't have that living intelligence anymore. And in fact, by the time Krishna was on the scene, he was talking about it, using the word alpameda. Those are very small, tiny intelligence. Alpa, meda, medas, like, it's like Meda Kendra, the intelligence of the heart. That's all gone. Alpa is just tiny, tiny little intelligence in there. So you can't get to them with that kind of teaching of sense of agency. That's really for the rest of us who are devotees, who are picking up on the idea that the game of Maya is afoot, and we have to pursue at a distance and release ourselves from those bonds. So he does without doing. We should probably say it. It does without doing, hears without hearing, sees without seeing, and it's beyond comprehension of ignorant beings. So remember, this is the Treta Yuga avatar, Sri Ramchandra, talking about Brahman, ultimate reality, thousands of years before Krishna, who was thousands of years before the Christ era. So you can see right away, you get impressed by India's longevity, spiritually speaking, and its clarity, how you can look back. It's like these, when they first came out of the light, they said, where's my laser and how can I burn through everything I'm about to experience and leave a trail to get back? Just because by now you say evolution is believed by everyone. But that's parinama, though. That's changefulness. that'll never get you to the truth. That'll just get you back in cycles. But science isn't even allowing for cycles because there's no involution for us. There's no way to get back to where we came from because there is no God. There's no spirit. There's no place where we came from because we were born in matter. But if you just knew that matter was born out of the mind, of course, you would be turning that whole thing on its ear, and you'd start having insights that cause you to remember these things. Self-realization would practically be years in a lifetime, if not sooner. 6 months was a term that Swami Vivekananda used. You should be able to realize the truth, in 6 months, or at least understand it again, recover it, reclaim it for yourself, because it's the property of your soul. So it shouldn't be that difficult to get a handle on it again and start using that handle to, pull away the veils of Maya. So you could see then how Sri Ramachandra, way back then, to use an expression, is looking out for the highest good of all beings, what Krishna was soon to call Loka Sangraha. When Krishna came along, this very thing that Ram's talking about has become more dire a situation in his yuga. And so he's going to say, well, I'm here for all the lokas, Loka Sangraha. I'm here to remind you of this great truth. Because at the end of the Gita, he says, those who give this truth to others, they're the best of my children. They've taken all the sacrifice to validate everything that I have done, the Avatar has done, for so many hundreds and thousands of years through Bharat, through the land of India, and kept this nadi open. So I was about to say that you took a laser, you penetrated through that, and you made sure you left beings behind you that kept that nadi open while you went down to the Burloka and tried to save people. And I think in the God blogs last week, when we were meeting, we had talked about how if you walk through a jungle with a machete, or say you don't have a machete, you walk through a jungle, all the leaves and foliage just close behind you. See? So you're making some headway through this morass of greenery, but you go in for a mile or two, you turn around and you just see nothing but greenery behind you. That's a metaphor of how people come to earth and forget everything that they've done in their past lifetimes. All the foliage of Maya, all the leaves, all the fronds, all the creepers, all the vines, just close in behind the soul and cause a complete vismriti of truth, complete forgetfulness. And so to wake up in the Kali Yuga is to acknowledge that. So how would you say that in India? There is suffering, the first noble truth of Buddha. That's how he said it. When he took a look and assessed the whole situation, he saw that there was suffering and there was a cause for it. He wasn't going to tell you about the sense of agency, non-doing. And he wasn't going to tell you about the formless Brahman. That wasn't his tact in the Kali Yuga where he lived. He was talking about there is suffering, admitted. Now, there are Buddhists nowadays that they call themselves Buddhists, but if they haven't accepted the first noble truth that everything's suffering, and they're just living a life of insouciance and joy and pleasure and drinking and Hollywood Buddhists and so forth, then they're not Buddhists. So this life of the Buddha lived was an exemplary life based on the fact that he saw, as Holy Mother was later to say, all of this suffering has gotten into the very marrow of my bones. My child, if you're tired of it, you can come with me. You do not have to be here anymore. So she came to tell us, that there's an immediate way out of this by connecting to the source. use the word avatar if you want, or we try and tend to stay away from the word savior. We try and point out the word exemplar. See, savior, you're dependent upon something. So the Advaita is standing off saying, well, okay, good luck with that one. Another 2,000 years, maybe you'll get free. Or wait for the next advent, you see. But you can be free right now if you fulfill your sufferings. That is, fulfill your desires, is what she's saying. So with every breath, you do that. So when you breathe in, you hold these teachings in mind. That's what Shankara in the Kali Yuga, 700 AD, said. When you breathe in, say, I am Brahman. When you hold the breath, say, I will always be Brahman. When you breathe out, say, I'm not the world. So that's how much the world of parinama, of change, has gotten into living beings, so that they're absolutely 100% convinced that they're the body. That is the first evolute of Maya. So let's look at the Tower of Truth, because this will explain to us what it is that the avatars have constructed, or basically is the eternal truth that they've seen. And when they come forth, they will point it out to us with single word teachings. It's not really rocket science, Advaita Vedanta. You've got to keep the thing in mind that it's simple. It might be profoundly simple, but nonetheless, you have to keep it in mind that it's a very simple thing. It's much like if you come at your problems and your suffering and you ask the questions, then of course that's going to be very difficult to find your way. But if you come out these problems is that through inquiry of asking these great souls to clarify and explain what they know about truth, then they'll give it to you simply. Like say, Tat Tvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi. I found this, my dear, to be the truth, and you can too. So in this Tower of Truth chart that we're about to see, we'll look at this part of this first statement that Ramchandra made. I'll read that part to you again. Who does without doing, hears without hearing, sees without seeing, is the soul of the universe. And so we can then go to the Tower of Truth. So you see there, this chart. Let's go to, look in the Kali Yuga. Who would you say has the best handle on non-duality? Hard to say, really. You've got Nagarjuna of the Buddhists, who definitely would be a go-to move for them. But for Vedantists, we tend to go towards Gaudapada. He says here, Brahman is unborn, free of sleep, devoid of dreams, beyond names and forms, flashing up all at once. It is omniscient, like intense concentration without end, but transcendent of conceptualization. It is silent, calm, illumined once and for all, unmoving, and free of fear. I think I put together maybe 2 or 3 slokas of Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad and put it in that fashion for all of us to see it. It's so startling. It's so disarming. It's so galvanizing. It's something that you'll probably just want to memorize and take into your meditation and use as your guiding light. It doesn't cover the whole Tower of Truth. That's one of the amazing things. You see the Tower of Truth there, so it won't take us long to go through that, because I'm just going to state them for you, because you're the one that's going to have to contemplate these, as I have done since I've found them. That is through reading scriptures like the Ramayana and the particularly Adhyatma Ramayana, the non-dual version, and also Sri Krishna's Gita and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and of course Swami Vivekananda. So you see from top to bottom, this tower of truth is based on these pillars. Brahman is truth, Satyam. That is non-dual truth. It is infinite. So it's Akala and it's Ananta. You can take all these words, like say Rupa, form, and then put an A in front of it, and you've got formlessness. So it's quite easy. So you've got Brahman is truth, Brahman is timeless, and Ananta. It's infinite. One of my teacher's favorite. You're infinite, not finite. You'd always say to us, you've hypnotized yourself into thinking that you're a finite being. And he would come at us like that to wake us up. Brahman is non-dual. And there's that precious word, Advaita. Advaita would be dual. A lot of beautiful teachings in Indian Dvaita and in Vishishta Dvaita too, the qualified non-duality. But Advaita is supreme, according to Gaudapada, our source here. Akarta, there's that one that got talked about right away by Sri Ram, right? It's actionless. Brahman is pure, formless, actionless, and divine, says the Upanishad. Yo Brahmanan vidadati purvam, yo vai vedamsya prahino hitasmai. A beautiful sloka that sometimes we chant toward Brahman out of the Upanishad. So it's perfect, it's ever pure, it's formless, and it's divine, and it's actionless, akarta. That's an important, for this day and age, that's an important pillar. See, so these are all pillars in this impregnable fortress of truth that have withstood the ravages of time, that is the yugas, right? The Mahayugas, and the impositions of space, that is, the akashas, physical akasha, energy akasha, thought akasha, chit akasha, so forth. That is chit akasha. So this pillar of truth, you might say that it's not necessarily not something that the avatars came up with and later told Gaudapada about so that he could tell us about it. It was already there. It's like what everything emerges from. That's why I put the great Gopi Ram down south behind this. You see how it rises there. It's huge. The people are little ants down there at the bottom. So this is a major structure, like a Shiva Lingam type of thing. And if you got up close to it, you would see all these different lokas, all these different gods. Each section of that Gopuram has a whole world in it with thousands of figures. It's beautiful to go up to it and look at it. And, so it's very difficult to accuse India of being just Dvaitists, dualists, and have too many gods. When you see that all these many gods are just have their place in the pantheon on this pillar of truth. And that's basically why Arupa or Rupa is a much higher concept to think of when you think about India and all it's given us for so long. So I pause there at Akarta because it's a very important pillar of this structure. Because we're trying to be actionless when we meditate, right? We want everything to quit acting. Our breath, our body, our limbs, our thoughts, everything. You've got to be Akarta. That's a great goal to attain, actionlessness. And we attain it by using Brahman as our medium for meditation, right? That's our great symbol. First, we start with an image of different kinds, archa and so forth. But then pretty soon we move into something more profound, like Ishvara. And then eventually we are taking in Brahman as the ultimate goal. And that's why we sit up and listen when we say it's pure and perfect and free of all action, free of doership and ownership. going on, Rupa, Brahman, Arupa, Brahman is formlessness. And Rupa, yet it takes forms. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna said God is beyond form. God is with form. God is formless too, but God is beyond both form and formlessness as well. So it's one of the things our founder, Lex Sixon, liked very much. He liked that idea of Rupa. And he started assigning it to beings like Mother Kali. Like the best way to describe Mother Kali would be to say she's the very form of formlessness. And so it'd be like something you can barely see through the mist or in the darkness, in the pale light. See, so you see this merging out of this nothingness and taking on a semblance of the form. That's why at one point Vivekananda said, I want to be a name without a, I want to be a, I want to be a voice without a form. So this is where we get into Ramchandra's saying is that it hears without hearing, it sees without seeing. So we must also say it speaks without speaking. So when you're with a profound friend who's realized, an eternal companion, you can sit with that being and feel the spiritual emanation coming off them. It's called ojas and tejas, right? We've studied that before. So when you have, I look back on, 2-3 times I was alone with Swami Sheshananda. Jeez, and maybe a dozen or more with Lex. So Lex Sixon, our founder, so the rest of the time I saw them going about life, you see, teaching at the center, Vedanta Center, and giving satsangs and all that. You see them then, but these times when you're alone with them in some sort of silence, like say when you got initiated and you just sat there with them, you realized that there was something very subtle that got transmitted to you. And that was what you had lived lifetimes to find. And that's what was going to help you recover your divine memory. That's called Daiva Smriti, by the way. You're suffering under the problem of Vismriti, but you want to get Daiva Smriti. You want your divine memory to come flooding back. Not just deja vu or some sort of little new age thing like that you picked up out of some verbiage that you heard somewhere. That's just a little trickle. You want your divine memory to come flooding back with certitude of who you are, that lasts, that makes you undaunted in the face of anything that's going to happen to you from that moment on. Because if you look back, there was a moment when you lost it, right? And that moment you're going to regret and rue. That's what suffering is forgetfulness. And you regret and rue everything that is valuable and spiritual and precious. And that caused your suffering. There was no other cause for it that was an ultimate cause that you can find. So when you're looking back in the tattvas and involving, letting go of things out here, that's a kind of suffering, but it's in reverse. So Holy Mother said, you spun the thread on the spool. That's the mind and karma. 3 different kinds of thread, black, red, and white. Spun that thread on the spool of your mind over lifetimes. Then you got nonplussed, you see. You got shocked. You got stunned. You found something came back that was very key that you couldn't forget. And that caused that spool of karta and karma and kala, without the A in front of it, to stop and start to spin the other way. And then all of this karma came off of you. And you still suffered, but it was a different kind of suffering. You were suffering in remembrance rather than in forgetfulness. And pretty soon, all that thread came flowing off the spool of your mind, and you were left pure and perfect as you are. And you said, oh, I went through a great journey here, and now I'm realized, you see. But you were always realized. You had just spun a cocoon over you, like a silkworm. And then you didn't like it anymore, and you sloughed it off like a snake its skin. So this is where form and formlessness become very important in the pillar of truth, this tower of truth, this impregnable fortress against Maya and ignorance. Then we go on. This is quick because these are things you can meditate on. Take one up and meditate on it later, or put them all together. Visit this Gopal realm and circumambulate it in your mind, or go to India and see one and circumambulate it on the Burloka. So next you have one of the all-time greats, Avicina. It's indivisible. If you put all-pervasive, Vibhu, with that, which is coming here soon, then you've got the perfect description in the fewest amount of words for Brahman. It's individual, indivisible, but it's all-pervasive. So you're not taking Brahman out of things. You're just taking the divisions out of things and leaving Brahman as it really is. So that's, I say, it's one of the greatest pillars of truth. Then we have Akshara, and of course we know Krishna used that in the Bhagavad Gita. One of the chapters called Akshara Brahman calls it that, indestructible, or imperishable if you prefer. Atindriya, well, indriyas are the senses, so it's beyond the senses, therefore it's omniscient. It sees, hears, speaks, and everything what the senses cannot. That is consciousness itself that powers the senses. And again, one of the greatest of all the greats, what I said already earlier, a parinama. It's immutable. Parinama would be just everything that changes all the time. You might as well just call it nature. Nature is parinama. And you've bought into nature. You thought you were born in nature. You don't know that nature was born out of you. And so many great so-called intelligent beings are telling you this, that you're a physical person, you're born in nature, you're born from the womb and so forth. But the great souls are telling you, you're born from the seeds in the great mind. You're a thought in the great mind. That's the greatest thought of all, would be I am Atma, Brahma. You might say thoughtless thought, achit. Then you go on, anirdeshya, Brahman is indescribable. So maybe we should just stop the seminar right now, quit talking and go meditate on this. But see, this is why it has to be taken in tandem. You have to hear it, shravana, then manana, think it, and then nididhyasana. I'm sorry for that. I apologize to you. But it's the Kali Yuga, what can I say? Things have to be reversed first before they're seen. Too much water's gone under the bridge. Ajata, the other great pillar, one of the greatest pillars. Brahman is unborn and uncreate, or that's where Vivekananda coined that word, acreate. He said, we heard everything about God is creator, God is this, God is that. And he came here to the West and he said, oh my gosh, we have to think of a word here that explains India and Advaita, which is closer or at one with the truth. Let's just put the A in front of it in English. It was brilliant, actually, acreate. It means it's back to a parinama, right? And God, I mean, if you really think about it, how could you create a soul? I mean, it's going to be hard enough to create like a skyscraper or philosophically a tower of truth like this, but create a soul, that's just unthinkable. A soul is. That's a two-letter word in English that they're using, see, or that thou art. See, how can you form something that's unformed? So this is why you look at things like arupa. It has no form. So you say, oh wow, Brahman, aren't you so great? You see, we really worship you down here on earth. We can tell you, you're the greatest. As it were, Brahmans just, as it were, laughing and say, but thou art that. See, I'm formless to show you that you're formless, but you keep creating forms, and you keep insisting that you are that form. So what can I do? See, except give you a simple word, arupa. You mean you're not here, O Lord? You're not here? Well, I'm arupa. I'm there, but I'm not there. I do, but I don't do. I see, but I don't see. I hear, but I don't hear. See? Or I see without seeing physically. I hear without hearing physically. And the same, these words I'm giving you right now, I'm speaking without speaking. When you talk about Dharma or truth, you don't really speak. Mother sits on your tongue and she speaks. Ajata then, unborn and acreate. And the rest get more into the concomitants of the Tower of Truth. Basically that you have some of the great statements there. Sarvam Kavidam Brahma, all is Brahman. Jivan Mukti, Brahman is the living liberated. Shanti Sharana, Brahman is the peaceful refuge. Vibhu, Brahman is all-pervasive and all-inclusive. Aham Tamamata, Brahman is egoless and genderless. Brahmavittama, the knowers of Brahman are Brahman. Parabrahma, Brahman is transcendent as well. Transcendent yet all-pervasive. And Brahma Hridaya, Brahman exists in the heart as intelligence. This is the fire of intelligence, living, aware intelligence. Now, to end this class, and we'll take 15 minutes and come back with some questions and dialogue. Let's look at the quote at the very bottom of the new chart, from Ram to Krishna to Ramakrishna. Because after all that Tower of Truth you've just seen, then I wanted to, the other chart, the new chart. We'll look at the bottom quote and see what it says there. I thought about it long and hard, and I would say that's why I'm protected by the very beautiful philosophical concept, if you want to call it that, of the Tower of Truth. And I'm convinced about the import of every one of these pillars, just like every one of the gods on that Gopuram you just saw is true in their own realm and in their own way. It's all true. The unreal never exists. The real never ceases to be. So there's only what's reality there when you strip off these false superimpositions and live in that state. So I thought about it long and hard, and so if I had to come down to it, I'd say, you've heard me talk about the two pillars of truth of Advaita. So I chose two others so it would stand on four legs. So basically, non-origination, non-transformation, non-agency, and indivisibility are the four pillars of Advaita Vedanta's incomparable non-duality. There are many other sub-pillars to this impregnable structure, this transcendental tower of truth, which raises an eternal fortress against Maya and rude ignorance. So may that Brahman protect us, may it sustain us, and may it illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with it or each other, and may what we study about it illumine our minds, enlighten our minds. eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. So here, I think we take a 15 minutes break, come back for a question and answer period. Thank you for being here.